Hey, it's the Midnight Raven, and today we're in a local graveyard of mine. If you guys know, recently I lost a friend, and although I can't get to his graveyard, I thought I would come here today to reflect and just to take a time to think about life, the future, and what it means. And there is no better place to contemplate life and death than a graveyard. This is a graveyard. It's not a cemetery, because a cemetery doesn't have a church, and a graveyard is usually attached to a church. And this has a tiny chapel. It doesn't have a church per se. It's more like a chapel or a chapel of rest compared to a full-on church. So it's slightly different. But if you know, I lost a friend recently. He was a long-term friend of 27 years. We knew each other in high school. We even had a crush on each other through high school, but we were always dating somebody else. You know, the law of attraction. There was always a close bond or a close-knit connection between the two of us, which was always felt. But let's take a little wander. So this churchyard isn't huge, but it is substantial for the town that it's in. They do have burials, as you can see. I'm not going to show any of the names, you're just going to see the bases of them. And they also have a crematorium plot. For anyone that is cremated, you get a tiny little plaque in the graveyard, and you also can be buried here. So it's not overly big. The chapel is obviously the focal point that's in the middle, and then the graves surround it. There are some fairly elaborate graves, as you can see there. That is what you call a family plot. So back in the day, family plots were a big thing, where you'd have mums, dads, grandparents and children all buried in the same plot. And what they would do is they would buy a tiny section and it would become a family plot. Now, I don't know if you can see, but looking at all these graves, they're kind of uniform. Most of them are black. Most of them are the same slopey shape. They're all kind of the same size and everything. Most of them, as you see, it's like a uniform, apart from the occasional one. Now, the ones that are usually white are usually more women, or they're usually children. This is the little chapel. I don't know exactly what's inside it. I believe there's enough to have like a tiny little like burial thing in there, but it's not like overly adorned. And then this is technically, this side is the old part of the graveyard, and as you can see, these ones are the newer sides which go up this way. So this side is the older side, and as you can see, the gravestones were made differently. Nowadays they're in this polished black stone. Back in the day they were mostly in this grey stone, and that was because it was cheap back then. But they did find that these stones, as much as they are a tribute, they're heavy, they're bulky, they weather, and as you can see, eventually due to the weight, they lean. So not necessarily good for the ground because they lean. These ones are now lighter, and they will stay in the ground more. You also get the forces as well, which have white ones with the cross and that on it, and usually with the bird on the top, meaning it's the Air Force. But this has been like newly done out recently. But yeah, now the gravestones are like this size. They're made differently. They're lighter and usually hollow, so that they stay in the ground a bit more. Obviously the older stones are a bit lighter compared to these. But it is a beautiful little graveyard, if you want to call it a graveyard. It's not a cemetery, because the cemetery doesn't have a church. And I've been to some beautiful cemeteries, like over time and stuff. But this is kind of different to most churchyards compared to others.